This is a case file. Every forensic examination begins the same way. There is a body, there is a room, and there is a question nobody thought to ask while the subject was still alive. The body, in this case, is a relationship. You do not call it that. You call it a falling out, a drifting apart. You use language designed to soften something that did not deserve to be softened, because the alternative, naming what it actually was, requires you to accept something far more uncomfortable. That person was never your friend. And the evidence was there, from the beginning, in the room, on the table, filed and documented and waiting to be read. This video is the examination. Not the therapy version, not the version that tells you it wasn't your fault, that you should heal and forgive and love yourself. The forensic version. The version that explains exactly what that person was.
Why they selected you specifically. What they were extracting while you called it friendship, and what their reaction to your growth ultimately revealed. 6 findings, 1 final report, and a conclusion most people are not prepared to sit with. Carl Jung wrote that the most dangerous person in your life is not your enemy. It is the one who presents as your ally while carrying everything you cannot yet see about yourself. Begin. Before we examine what they did, we must establish what they were. Not who they told you they were. Not who they seemed to be at the beginning, when the warmth was there and the conversations ran long and you thought, for the first time in a long time, that someone finally understood you. What they actually were. Psychology has a name for this character type. It is not a name they would ever apply to themselves. Covert narcissism.
Not the loud, obvious, self-aggrandizing kind most people recognize. Not the person who walks into every room announcing their own importance. The covert type is different. The covert type is quiet, attentive, curious about you in a way that initially feels like genuine interest. They ask questions. They remember details. They seem to understand you in ways that others do not. This is the profile, and it is designed. Carl Jung spent decades mapping what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we cannot consciously acknowledge, the drives we have buried because they conflict with the identity we have constructed. And Jung discovered something that changes how you read every relationship you have ever had. We do not primarily relate to other people through our strengths. We relate to them through our wounds. And the covert narcissist has learned, not always consciously, but with a precision that feels deliberate, to enter through the opening that your wound creates. They did not love you. They recognized you. There is a distinction, and it matters more than almost anything else you will understand from this examination. To be loved is to be seen in your entirety, your contradictions, your failures, your unglamorous interior, and to have someone choose to remain anyway. To be recognized is something else entirely. To be recognized is to have someone identify what you carry and understand how to position themselves accordingly. The person in your case file recognized you. They saw what you needed. Validation, understanding, someone who finally got it, and they gave you exactly that. Not because they felt it, because it gave them access.
Access to what? You will understand shortly.
People with this psychology do not move randomly. This is the part of the examination that produces the most resistance, because it requires you to accept that your selection was not accidental, that something about you, something specific, made you the subject of this particular case file. That is not a condemnation of you. It is a forensic fact. And the sooner you understand what the selection criteria actually were, the less likely you are to appear on another case file. Machiavelli wrote, and few people truly understand what he meant, that the most dangerous allies are those who come to you too willingly, who offer too much too soon, who seem to need nothing from you in the obvious ways, because what they need from you exists below the visible surface of the transaction. Here is what the covert narcissist selects for. Not weakness, not stupidity, not gullibility in any simple sense.
They select for potential, for forward movement, for the specific quality of someone who is becoming something, who carries an energy of growth, of ambition, of building something real. They require proximity to that energy the way a plant requires proximity to light. Not to participate in your growth, to be adjacent to it, to warm themselves beside a fire they could not build themselves. Jung called this psychic vampirism, and the term is more precise than it sounds. The individual who cannot generate aliveness through their own becoming attaches to someone else's becoming instead. They do not drain you of energy in a way you can name. They drain you of momentum, of the quiet certainty that you were moving in the right direction. And they do it slowly, and they do it kindly, and you call it friendship. There is one additional selection criterion, and this one is the most painful to hear.
They chose you because you were generous with your interior life, because you believed that openness was the currency of real connection, because you said things out loud that most people keep private, because you trusted, because you wanted to be trusted. In a world of honest people, this is a profound gift. In the world as it actually operates, it is a file left open on a desk, and they read every page. The friendship, as you experienced it, was real. The warmth you felt was real. The connection you believed existed was real to you. But underneath what you were experiencing, something else was happening entirely. Forensic psychology distinguishes between two categories of social behavior that look identical from the outside. Attachment, the genuine drive to know another person, to share in their reality, to build something mutual. And extraction, the systematic process of gathering information and proximity without genuine reciprocity. The operating difference between the two is invisible until the relationship reaches a pressure point. The operation had three functions. They ran simultaneously, and you will recognize all of them. Function 1: intelligence gathering. Every conversation in which you shared something vulnerable, a fear, a failure, an ambition, a wound, was a conversation they remembered. Not because it mattered to them, because information is leverage. Because knowing what a person is afraid of, what they are ashamed of, what they want most and believe they might not deserve, This knowledge changes the structure of power in a relationship. They asked questions that felt like care. They were building a file. Function 2, growth management. This is the one most people miss because it operates through apparent support. When you shared an idea, they engaged with it and then offered a concern, a gentle question about whether you had thought it through, a quiet observation about how something similar had not worked for someone else. Nothing overtly discouraging, nothing you could point to and call sabotage. Just a consistent friction, present every time you moved forward, absent when you stayed still. The covert narcissist does not want you to fail. They want you to remain at a level where your energy is still available to them, where you still need them, where your success does not force them to confront the distance between your trajectory and theirs. Function 3, failure observation. When things went wrong for you, and they watched closely for when things went wrong, something shifted. You may have noticed it without naming it, a quality of attention that was different from concern, a presence that felt almost hungry. Jung identified this in his clinical work and named it the shadow emotion most humans find too ugly to confess to themselves. Schadenfreude, elevated beyond simple pleasure at another's misfortune. The relief of watching someone you secretly envy stumble. The proof, finally, that you were not so far behind. They were not your friend in your worst moments. They were your audience. The operation is complete. Now you understand what was actually happening in the room. The evidence existed from the beginning. This is the part that produces guilt, the recognition that the information was present, documentable, and you did not read it. And the first thing to understand is not that you were careless, but that you were neurologically prevented from reading it. Here is what happens in your brain when you form a bond with another person. Oxytocin, the same neurochemical that mediates mother-infant attachment, begins to circulate. And what oxytocin does, with a precision that seems almost designed to leave you vulnerable, is dampen the activity of the amygdala, the region of your brain responsible for threat detection. Trust, neurologically, is the suppression of your own alarm system. You were not ignoring the evidence. You were chemically insulated from it by the same mechanism that makes human bonding possible in the first place. But the evidence was there. And in retrospect, in the cold light of the examination table, it follows a pattern. Exhibit 1. They could not celebrate you without attaching a qualifier. That's amazing. I'm honestly surprised it went that well. You deserve this. I know how much you've been doubting yourself. The compliment always arrived with a shadow attached, something small.
Something you would be ungracious to name, but it was always there. Exhibit 2. The relationship required you to be the confessor. Real friendship is mutual exposure. Two people making themselves known to each other at approximately equal depth. What you had was asymmetric. You shared, they listened. They shared, but strategically, rarely, and in ways that positioned them sympathetically without revealing anything they were genuinely ashamed of. They knew your interior. You knew their surface. Exhibit 3. Your good news produced a specific silence. Not always, not obviously, but the pattern was there. A moment when you shared something that had genuinely gone well, a success, a recognition, a relationship that was working, and the response arrived a fraction too slow. The energy shifted. Something that was not quite joy occupied the space where joy should have been. You registered it.
You filed it under something you could not name. You continued. These were not coincidences. These were exhibits, and they have been waiting in the file this entire time. There is a moment in every relationship of this kind that serves as the final piece of evidence. A moment that retroactively clarifies everything that preceded it. It is the moment you begin to move. Not the small movements, not the ordinary progress of an ordinary life. The unmistakable kind. The kind that is visible. The kind that cannot be explained away as luck or temporary, or the product of circumstances that will eventually correct themselves. You got the thing. You became something. You stepped into a version of yourself that was undeniably different from the person they had filed information on. And something changed. It arrived in different forms for different people. Sometimes it was a withdrawal, a cooling, a decrease in contact they never explained. Sometimes it was the opposite, a sudden intensification of criticism, a revisionism about your shared history, a story about you that began circulating in the social environment you both inhabited. Sometimes it was something smaller and stranger, a comment that arrived sideways, a joke with an edge they could deny was an edge, a comparison that positioned you as fortunate rather than capable. Machiavelli understood this pattern across 5 centuries. He wrote that the true test of an alliance is not how an ally behaves when you are struggling. It is how they behave when you no longer need them. An ally who supported your weakness and resents your strength was never an ally. They were a creditor. And your growth was a debt they had not agreed to forgive. What happened between you and this person, however it manifested, was not personal in the way that betrayal typically feels personal. It was biological. The organism that had organized itself around proximity to your energy was experiencing a threat response to your evolution. They did not turn on you. They revealed themselves. And there is a difference that matters. Turning on someone implies a choice, a departure from an original state of loyalty. Revealing themselves implies that what you finally saw had always been there, below the surface, operating quietly, waiting for the pressure that would force it into the light. The pressure was your growth, and the light it created was the last evidence the case file needed. This is the final finding, and it is the one most people leave this examination without accepting. You were not a victim of exceptional cruelty. You were not targeted by some rare predator operating outside the normal range of human behavior. What happened to you happens constantly, in offices and families and friendships and collaborations, in every social ecosystem where human beings gather and organize themselves into hierarchies of proximity and trust. The uncomfortable question is not what that person was. You understand now what they were. The uncomfortable question, the one this autopsy ultimately requires you to answer, is what you were at the time that made this possible. Not what was wrong with you, what was true of you. Carl Jung did not describe the shadow purely as something that exists in other people. He described it as the material each of us carries that we cannot fully face. The parts of ourselves we have edited out of the version we present to the world.
And he observed, with a precision that should unsettle you,
that what we cannot see in ourselves, we attract in others. The person in your case file was carrying something, an envy they could not acknowledge, a thirst for progress they could not generate within themselves, a wound so unexamined that the only way they could manage it was to position themselves beside someone whose wound was slightly more visible. And something in you, not your weakness, but your unresolved resonance with exactly that dynamic, made the frequency match. That is not blame. Blame is for therapy sessions and conversations that end with your feelings validated and your patterns unchanged. This is a forensic finding. And forensic findings exist not to make you feel better about what happened, but to prevent the same cause of death from appearing in a future case file.
the question you now carry is not, how could they have done this to me? It is, what in me has changed since then that would not recognize this person as someone to trust? If the answer is nothing, if this examination has produced clarity without transformation, then the case file is not yet closed, because the pattern will recur, with a different face, at a different stage of your life, but following the same operational logic. And if the answer is something, if the work that occurred between who you were then and who you are now has genuinely altered what you recognize and what you allow, then the file can close. Not with forgiveness. Forgiveness is a separate operation, and an optional one. With understanding. With the cold, precise, unromantic clarity of someone who has read the evidence, followed the chain of custody, and arrived at a conclusion that does not require anyone else's confirmation. They were never your friend. And the most important thing you can do with that knowledge is not to protect yourself from the next version of them. It is to become someone the next version of them would never approach in the first place. That is the autopsy report. Case closed.